Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Why We Geek for March 2017. And today, we've got a very unique panel and conversation that we're going to be talking about, but very relevant to this month. And of course, first of all, welcome to Why We Geek, the show where we actually take a piece of geek culture, a facet of it, and we don't analyze it, but we go over why we love it, why we're passionate about it. Doesn't necessarily need to be geek culture, but yeah, we go over why we're passionate about it and why we geek about it. I am your host, Adam Mickelson, aka Drac, also the host of Geek News, Reviews, and Opinions, which is kind of appropriate because my panel has a bunch of familiar faces, one of which is my returning wife, Andrea. So say hello, everybody.
Hi, everybody.
There you go. I have her very much under a very tight leash. No, that's not how it works. So Andrea is returning because this subject is also very passionate for her. So this is going to work. And then we also have another very passionate geek about this subject. In fact, usually when him and me are on the podcast and this comes up, Aldo's usually the one complaining that he can't get us to stop talking about it. And that, of course, is Stephen Romney of Studio Ghost Utah of From the Shelf, Romney's Reviews. Romney, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing pretty good. I've managed to basically have somewhat of an enjoyable weekend after the show, and I've just been kind of trying to take it easy while getting the next episode of From the Shelf ready to go.
Yeah, it's already a busy week for me too, because we just barely had Horizon Zero Dawn released today, and this Friday is the Nintendo Switch, so already it's just going to be freaking crazy. But enough about that, because this is not about our weekly schedule. We have geek news for that. Today we're going to be talking about Power Rangers. Go Power Rangers. Do 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 do. I can't do that in like the slow tone. It just doesn't work. Yeah, but praise be to
that's one song you just cannot Shatnerize.
No. Praise be to the Ron Wasserman gods. But yes, we're going to be talking Power Rangers. Why? Because, well, we're on the eve of March right now. It's literally February 28th. And we have a movie coming out midway into the month that we have all been excited about. We've been following the coverage, and we want to make sure that they get right, especially considering that this is like the first Power Rangers movie that hasn't had a whole lot of hiccups in production or anything like that. Saban has actually been able to help out with the process of it, and we're actually looking at, if this is at least is successful, a full-on cinematic universe based around Power Rangers. Don't know how that's going to work out, but that's at least what Saban wants. So that's at least what we could say. But the perfect place to start from these, and this is what I did with the Disney and Harry Potter, and probably is going to be the tradition, is as fans of Power Rangers / Super Sentai, because I have a feeling with Romney being the resident Sentai expert, we are going to be bringing up Sentai. We're just going to go around the table really quick and go over our first exposure to Power Rangers and what actually drew us in and made us the fans that we are. So I'll go ahead and start, just kind of give an example. Mine's fairly easy because I was about, I want to say 10 years old, something like that, when Power Rangers aired. And originally I wasn't going to watch it, but then one of the commercials that I actually saw for it was of the episode where they get the power weapons. And so at that point, when they all came out and they were shining, I was like, oh, they're lightsabers. And that initially was my hook. I'm just like, oh my gosh, lightsabers. I have to watch this now. And that's not what happened. But eventually I got hooked in because of the characters and because of the stories that they were trying to tell. And I think overall the episode that hooked me into the series and made me the fan that I was the Green with Evil saga. The one that went 5 parts and was absolutely amazing to watch in a week, like a week time. So like you saw episode 1, then you saw episode 2, and things just kept on getting bad and bad and bad until episode 5 came along, and we finally had the 6th Ranger come out into play. So that's what made me a passionate geek about it. Romney, what was your first moment that drew you into Power Rangers and made you the fan that you are?
Well, that's a bit tricky. All things considered, to kind of give full disclosure, I was like 3 or so years old when the series debuted, so I didn't actually really watch it from the beginning. And so my first exposure was through a lot of the reruns, especially as they were starting to cycle out the daily episodes in favor of showing them each week. So I would watch a lot of the reruns, It was around, I think it was sometime during season 2 that is kind of when I first started watching, because I don't really remember the Green Ranger as much from the reruns I saw, but I remember the White Ranger being the big thing. I remember that there was a Halloween costume that a friend of my dad's had that was not the cheesy one with the cheesy plastic mask, but actually had a helmet.
Had a helmet, yeah.
Yeah, granted it was like the flimsy leather kind, but still, the fact that it actually wrapped around instead of just being a cheesy plastic mask, like, the friend of my dad's kid borrowed it, then he lent it to us, and so one year I got to wear it, another year my younger brother got to wear it. It kind of got passed around.
Nice.
And so, with my earliest exposure that made me kind of more of a fan, actually didn't really occur until Lost Galaxy. Now, this may surprise a lot of people, because I watched a lot of reruns. I did have a favorite character, which was Billy, because, hey, he's smart, like me, and you can be smart and be a hero. But it wasn't really until, because I watched reruns of Mighty Morphin, never got to see Zeo because I had no idea that Zeo was even a thing. Saw episodes of Turbo, but that was when I kind of was losing a little bit of interest, mainly when I started playing video games. And then after that, I watched In Space on and off, mainly because of the surreal crossover with the Ninja Turtles. But it wasn't really until Lost Galaxy and then Lightspeed Rescue where I started watching it fairly regularly, at least until the end of Time Force, before the switch to the Disney block, because I didn't know Disney bought out Saban. I just thought they canceled the show. And so that was kind of how I got drawn into it, that I knew about it, but it wasn't really until Lost Galaxy that I was actually on board.
That's kind of my story too, is like Mighty Morphin drew me in, Zeo hooked me. Turbo was where I went, eh. And then In Space, I watched pieces here and there, but to me it was like, this is Power Rangers meets Star Trek. And since I was like, at that point I was a kid who was like anti-Star Trek because everybody else in my family was pro-Star Trek. So at that point, I can't watch this now because it's Star Trek. And then I watched the end of In Space because I wanted to see the end of the Zordon era. And Lost Galaxy was the one where I started dropping off. And then I became like a here and there fan until Netflix. Netflix is what really did it for me, because then I could go back to a lot of the seasons that I'd missed and really appreciate them. Andrea, what was the first moment that drew you in and made you the Power Rangers fan that you are?
Well, I can't say I remember which episode that I started, that I watched the very first time, but I do remember that when it was like, when you had Power Rangers coming on the air and stuff like that, then you had like VR Troopers and you're having Beetleborgs. So I was like watching all three to see what was so great about each one. But then as I was watching each series, Power Rangers kind of stood out to me the most.
Yeah.
And then I eventually just say, well, I'm not really interested in Beetleborgs or VR Troopers anymore, because Power Rangers seemed more inclined to me.
And really. The sad part about that, it was like they were all from the same creative mind. They were all from the same guy who had made Sentai, but also made Kamen Rider. And so at that point, that's why we had the same lure. VR Troopers, Masked Rider, Beetleborgs, they were all made from the same guy.
Well, to a point. That's where you get kind of the nitty-gritty, but they are all made by the same company, and they did use a lot of the same pseudonyms, where if they didn't want to give any particular person credit since it was a company production, the two pseudonyms Toei usually uses is Saburo Hatte or Saburo Yatsude. That's just their way of saying, hey, we gave someone credit, but there's just way too many people to credit for this franchise, so that's just the fake name we throw out.
Exactly.
But yeah, I would say that, I did catch it early on when it was, we were having Rita Repulsa as the villain. That's how early I started. I wouldn't say if I remember if I watched the first episode from the very beginning, you know. But then, I've always enjoyed watching Power Rangers, and I get, to the point where I'm actually recording it on a VHS and, copying.
Which is interesting for us because I don't know about Romney, but like for us, there was an anti-culture towards Power Rangers. So it almost became like, not forbidden, but it became like you would lose a lot of popularity points if you brought up that you watched Power Rangers. And so at that actually like became, I don't know about you, but like that became a problem for me, where like I was the kid who was teased because I still watched I watched Power Rangers. What, do you still watch Ninja Turtles? Because at that point, you're getting ready to go into middle school, and so at that point it's like, well, you watch stuff for babies. And so we actually came in like right at that point, but you came in much, much, much later where Power Rangers was an established thing.
Yeah, and it was for me, I kind of lucked out, given that around the time that Time Force came to an end and they moved over, that was when I was still in elementary school, and so I didn't quite follow a lot of that was just kind of around the time where shortly after the end of Time Force, they were starting to get rid of a lot of like the weekday blocks and were just slowly phasing a lot of that stuff out. And so by the time I hit junior high, Power Rangers itself wasn't really something that lost me any credibility. That was more when I was getting into anime at that time. And so it was more, I had other things. And so
well, because around that time would have also been Pokemon v Digimon. And so at that point, that would have been the new scapegoat to go against.
Although I do remember a lot of paranoid daycares, the two daycares I stayed at as a kid, like, one just basically said you couldn't bring any toys that had any tie to violence of any kind, so basically no Power Rangers, no Captain Planet. Basically, the only thing you could bring were basically cars, if they weren't Transformers, so Hot Wheels you could get away with. So basically you could bring Hot Wheels, you could bring plush toys, or basically nothing that condoned violence. And, I mean, Power Rangers I get, but Captain Planet, that always baffled me even then.
Well, that just sounds to me like if I ever went to this daycare, I'd be like instantly kicked out because that's all I had was Transformers. So at that point, they would just be like, "Get out! No, just get out." All right, so on to the next question that I want to get into, because Power Rangers has a long history now. I mean, Sentai has a much bigger one, but we're now looking at what so Super Mega Force was the 20th anniversary of Power Rangers. So at that point, we're now into Ninja Steel. So we're looking at like the 22nd season.
Well, because
because you have to split them into 2 seasons. So at that point,
we're coming on like 25 years. We're coming on like 25 or so.
Almost 25 years of Power Rangers. And so the next thing that I need to ask, and I'm actually going to make it a 2-pronged question because we're all kind of old enough that we can make this distinction. Your favorite Power Rangers series, and I'm gonna the way it's 2-pronged is, since we're old enough, I'm gonna add a prong in here going Zordon era and then post Zordon era, because for me and Andrea, I don't know about Romney, but for me it's really, like, for us it's stupid easy because we can go say the original. So at that point we'll do the 2-prong stuff, and when I say favorite series, you can go back and watch virtually any episode of that series and still enjoy it as if you were watching it for the first time. So let's go ahead and start with Andrea. Your Zordon era one, and then your post Zordon era one.
Well, since everyone will probably say Mighty Morphin is their ultimate favorite, I'm gonna not pick that one and just put that aside. If I had to do pre-Zordon, or the Zordon era, I'd go with In Space is my favorite.
Okay, do you want to give a reason for it, or?
It kind of is a nice type of. It's like a story that bases around all the villains, everything coming together, from very beginning to the very end of that era. It's just
enticing. Just a culmination of everything that's come before.
It was just enticing.
It gives you like a final payoff for everything you'd seen up until that point.
I know. It's like it comes to a closure, of one story.
Okay.
As a base.
And then your favorite post Zordon era.
This
is where it became like every season was a different version, and therefore different stories and things like that.
I'm trying to think. I'm going to have to say, I'm almost wanting to say maybe Jungle Fury.
Jungle Fury? Okay, so this would Jungle Fury would have been Disney era, wouldn't it?
Yeah, that was like the tail end of the Disney era.
Tail end of the Disney, because RPM is the last one. So your reason for Jungle Fury then? Because again, this is the Disney era, so this is the one that like hardcore Power Rangers fans will just like go, ugh, how come you like the Disney season?
I don't know. It's just an interesting way of, using animal spirits to, form your ranger attire and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's a hard call, really.
Okay. So why don't you go ahead and go next, Romney? So your favorite Zordon era one, and then your favorite post Zordon era one.
Well, this is definitely a tricky distinction since I don't have as much nostalgia attached to the Zordon era as other fans because
Well, if you want to toss another in instead of that, then that's fine. Because I was really setting that rule kind of more for us.
yeah,
Because the Zordon, we lived in the Zordon era, so.
yeah, for me, as for which series, although I still have nostalgia for Mighty Morphin and a lot of the reruns, I still know the characters' names just because of all the reruns and the fact that repetition will make you remember anything. But as for series that I kind of have the most fondness for, that I have the most vivid memories of watching, it's kind of a two-way tie between Lightspeed Rescue and Time Force, just because most of the moments I still see vividly in my mind. Like, for example, off the top of my head, vivid memory of Lightspeed Rescue is when you see Carter Grayson trying to use the Titanium Morpher, like, the lights all go out, everything's like, you see this build up, and then you see it just doesn't work, and because it's still experimental. So that's my vivid memory from Lightspeed Rescue, and as for, like, my vivid main plot memory from Time Force, is that finale where they're all standing on the beach, the members of Time Force are getting ready to go back into the future, Jen and Wes kind of say their last goodbye as they basically part ways with the hug, because it's a kid's show, you can only get away with a hug, because now people are paying attention. So,
which is funny because before then, Tommy and Kimberly had gotten away with a kiss, and so I never understood Fox's reasoning for that.
Yeah, that was basically because more parents groups kind of got a little more up in arms in the wake of Mighty Morphin, especially now that they didn't have the nostalgia of the past seasons to bank on for Time Force. They probably figured, okay, let's hedge our bets a little because there's no guarantee we're still keeping the same audience with each season. So those are kind of the two series I remember most fondly. Although it's been a while since I went back and rewatched them, I still have the giant Ranger head with all the DVDs that I still need to make my way through. But
yeah, so if anybody wants to question Romney's validity here, he actually has a collector's edition that's literally a Red Ranger's head that has every season up until, is it Samurai? Does it have Samurai?
Yeah, it has Samurai and it has Megaforce, but not Super Megaforce.
Megaforce, so that's where it ends.
Yeah, so I had to buy those two separately, and that's when they swapped over from Shout Factory to Lionsgate for some reason. I'm not sure why.
Probably because of the movie, because Lionsgate is funding it. So for me, I'm going to go with the Zordon era and the post-Zordon era. I'm assuming that we covered everything for Romney.
Pretty much.
Yeah, Time Force and Lightspeed Rescue. For me, my Zordon era one is actually, you thought that I was going to go for Mighty Morphin. I won't.
Well, that's why I say you might as well, everyone.
But I wouldn't go there. My favorite Zordon era one is actually Zeo. And the reason it's Zeo is because, while I do love Mighty Morphin and all that it did, like I love the Green with Evil saga, I love the White Light, Ninja Quest, all of those really great multi-parters. The fact that Zeo actually had that overall theme of stronger than before, always building up our power to be able to fight a new threat. I always liked the momentum feeling of Zeo whenever I watched it. Like the theme song would always get me hyped up whenever that would come on. Another thing that I really loved was the flip, where in Mighty Morphin, it was magic versus technology. So Zordon was technology, and then Rita would always be magic. And Zeo, they flipped it and basically made it so that technology was Zeo. It was the Power Rangers, it was that. And then, they were more magic based, and the Machine Empire was the technology one. So you literally had magic being the wielding weapon in there, and then technology was the enemy.
Yeah, and even to a point, because it's not even so much that they swapped all to magic. I would think that it's more that they took the best of both worlds. You had the technology from Zordon, the magic of the Zeo Crystal, and so basically what they had was showing, here's what we can do if we combine these forces together and use it for good. That's kind of, as someone who watched Zeo long after the fact, that's kind of what I took away of, hey, let's take what was once used for evil and find a way to make it good.
That and the other thing with Zeo was, I get it. The first half of Turbo we still had the same cast, roughly, because Steve Cardenas had left. But I actually feel like they really just should have started Turbo, in retrospect. They should have started Turbo with a new cast, because Zeo is almost like the fondest farewell you could ever give to that cast. So Jason David Frank is the Red Ranger. Finally, that he moved from being the Sixth Ranger to being just the regular leader. I still love the Zeo cast with Johnny Young Bosch, Steve Cardenas, Catherine Zunderland, and Nakia Barais. I always will like them, and also I can't even believe I'm saying this because like we'll get into like best and worst Rangers too, but my worst Ranger actually became Soke in that season, and that was Jason. I have never been a Jason fan ever. And he actually became a character that I could somewhat respect by the end of Zeo. My favorite post-Zordon era, you actually kind of hit it with one of them, which was Jungle Fury. But since you already said that, I'm actually going to go a different direction because of this series trying to break so many barriers and actually successfully doing it and not getting too tacky, too hammy. SPD. And the reason I like it is because... So this was the first season, to my knowledge, that actually broke past 6 Rangers, and for good reason, because it's a police unit, so it made sense to have multiple Rangers. It was the first one to actually have an alien, like alien as in Rita Repulsa monster kind of alien that could become a Ranger in Doggy Kruger, and actually has an awesome story to him as well as being an awesome little like mentor figure. But I'll admit, one of the things that really drew me to things like In Space was the Psycho Rangers. And the only time I would ever say that the Psycho Rangers were topped was when I think they were called the A Unit, where they were the enemy at the end of SPD. And they were actual Rangers who willingly went over to the side of evil. The only thing I don't like about that concept is that this was the first ever Red Ranger to be a woman. And so it's like, oh, if they're ever led by a woman, they'll go evil.
Yeah, and it's funny how the producers had to fight tooth and nail to do that, because Disney didn't want them to have a female Red Ranger in any capacity. And so I can't remember who the main producer of that season was. I think it wasn't Judd Lynn. I think it was Bruce Kalish. Actually.
No, this was the beginning of the Kalish era.
Yeah,
so it was Bruce Kalish that ran.
Yeah, and Kalish literally had to fight tooth and nail just for that, and it just makes me wonder kind of what the people, if Power Rangers had stayed with Disney, what they would have done with Samurai, just given everything that happens in Samurai.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Do you think they would have had the same issue when they had that Red Ranger for Samurai show up?
I mean, unless they got what.
Oh, you mean the sister?
Yeah, the sister
okay.
who was temporarily stepping in for Jaden as the leader.
Well, knowing Disney, if they had gotten their way, they would have basically just had it be a dub of the Sentai, so they probably wouldn't have cared.
Would have been.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so that's the sad part of it is like if Disney had gotten their way, it wouldn't have even been a dub. It would have been just syndication. That's really what Disney wanted out of the whole dang thing.
Yeah,
and
syndication and toys.
Yeah. So the next question that we're going to go into, and we're going to be doing best and worst a little bit because Power Rangers has this long-standing legacy, and then I'm hoping to get into like the movies and things like that. But since we're talking about best series, it's only appropriate that we talk about best and worst. Best and worst. Well, actually, let's really quick hit worst series because I have a feeling like people are going to want to have that discussion in there. And I'm pretty sure that they'll understand the reasons that we have that. So, Romney, your worst series that you ever had with Power Rangers?
Well, out of what I've seen, at least based on what I actually have nostalgia for, and this is something I kind of realized after trying to watch a rerun of it that was on the short-lived Vortex block, would have to be Lost Galaxy, because you can definitely tell it was a season that had a lot of problems behind the scenes. I mean, it had the inflated budget because they couldn't get Mystic Knights of Tir-Na-Nog Season 2 off the ground, so all that money was funneled into Lost Galaxy, but there are just some episodes. I mean, and I thought the filler in Zeo could get bad, but some of the filler in Lost Galaxy is just not very tolerable, especially when you can kind of tell that the writers just had no idea what they could do, since they were just getting episodes of the Sentai as they were coming out and just had to adapt. So, out of what I've seen, which is very limited, it would have to be Lost Galaxy because of some of the missteps.
The other problem with Lost Galaxy, I think, is that it was kind of a Pardon Our Dust series, because this was when they actually officially stepped away from the Zordon canon and actually tried to have an independent series. I say stepped away from the Zordon canon, even though, yes, I know Pink Ranger swap, and it was Andros' sister that came in, but and that's fine. But most of it was basically saying we're trying to get this off the ground without the original cast, without Zordon, without that conflict, while establishing a new one. Andrea, your worst series of Power Rangers, and I mean like you cannot stand going back to this series.
Of course, I would probably watch it again just to see.
Yes, you probably would, but again.
But I guess I would say probably the one that I would probably say that was the weakest that I did not, care for as much. It's not my most absolute favorite. Would probably be Operation Overdrive.
Thank you.
I would say the only thing that was okay about it was the multiple combinations of the Zords, but
yeah.
I think the story just seemed like, it's a mediocre story. But
people might be wondering why I'm going thank you, because I love Andrea dearly, but she would literally defend the weakest links of the bunch. Like, I'm thoroughly convinced if you assigned her to be the defense attorney for Power Rangers Turbo, she'd Phoenix Wright it and she'd actually win because of her passion for it. And she finally went to the season that, like, when she was watching it, I was like getting ready to go to bed, and it was so painful to sit through that because of all of the villains and all of the problems. So that's why I'm saying thank you for saying Operation Overdrive is crap.
Well, I'm not saying it's crap. I'm just saying that.
Okay, I'm saying it's crap.
Well, you're saying it's crap, but I just say it's just like, would I watch it like marathon it like every single day? No. I'd probably pick another series over that as much, but...
Yeah, okay. My worst series... This is tough, because there's a couple that I can't absolutely
I bet
stand.
you're going to say Mystic Force.
No, because Mystic Force has redeeming qualities.
Okay.
Mystic Force actually had... Its theme song sucked, but it was still like a fairly good story and a fairly good like Arthurian kind of story for the Rangers. For me, it would probably it's like this very strong tie between Overdrive and Wild Force, and simply for different reasons. Overdrive, I literally feel like they had literally no direction from minute one. You had no idea what you were actually trying to accomplish in that series. And Wild Force, I felt like they had tons and tons of potential and wasted it on preaching.
Yeah, it's funny some of the behind-the-scenes stuff that happened for those. Like, with Overdrive, the lack of direction, one thing a lot of people forget is that show was being produced during a little thing called the writer's strike. So the lack of direction, there's a reason. It's because most of the good people were on strike or writing under pseudonyms. Not to mention Disney kept slashing the budget every 5 seconds.
I mean, the problem also was the fact like they were coming in on pseudonyms, and then basically by the time RPM rolled around, the people who are doing Power Rangers just had to go sit there and go, "Do you love what you're doing? Please come and help us so that we can keep this going." And that's where you actually got people like Judd Lynn to come in and actually come in and write for it, even though it was still writer strike time.
Yeah, and as for Wild Force, that is also an interesting distinction. It's something we can probably go into later on, but that was like one of the first times where they were trying to basically do a recreation of the original Sentai. Like, they were trying to copy the exact same story, for better and for worse.
Yeah, this was one of those debate series. So, like, Turbo was also a debate series where, like, some writers wanted to go the Sentai's direction and other writers on the staff wanted to go a serious direction. Wild Force was one that suffered from this. I think also Ninja Storm, to some extent, suffered from this because of the whole Amit Bhaumak thing, and
then the move to New Zealand was also a big factor as well.
Yeah. So it's one of those problems where it's just a cluster F of issues that came to both these series. But the thing that just immediately killed it for me was having a 10-year-old kid preach to me as a supposed god of the Wild Zords. And yeah, it was I can never forgive Wild Force for that.
It just makes you wonder what would happen if it was produced by Ted Turner.
Yeah, well, no, I don't want to imagine that. So with that, let's go ahead and go into another best, which is best Ranger throughout the series. Again, I'm gonna preface this with a Zordon era and a post Zordon era for us two, and then for Romney, if he wants to pick a Zordon era and a post one, he can do that with all of that, because I'm gonna go ahead and go first because mine is freaking obvious. And actually, no, I'm gonna add another one: best male and female ranger for them, because I do want to showcase the female rangers. There are actually a lot of really good characters amidst all of them. So my Zordon era one, this is not hard for me, Tommy and Kimberly, and it's just because Tommy was a good enough guy that you wanted to be him, and then Kimberly was my crush. And so the fact that Tommy got to get hooked up with Kimberly, that was just an endless plus. If I had to pick somebody aside from Tommy, I would probably say Billy, because Billy was the one that I could relate to, being the geek of the bunch. So that would be my Zordon ones. My post Zordon era, that's where it gets a little more difficult. With the female ranger, I have to go with, and I can't remember her name off the top of my head. Jen, I think, from Time Force.
Yeah.
Because of the fact that she basically was the de facto leader of the Time Force Rangers. She was the commanding officer, and she was badass while she did it. I will admit the crossover didn't help her by putting her in a bunch of skin tight leather, but she still was badass when she came out. So I have no problem giving that to her. The best male ranger. Ooh, that's a little bit more difficult, but I'm gonna have to probably go. I'm gonna have to go Carter. Carter Grayson is like if there was a Tommy after a Tommy, it was Carter. Because I mean, for crying out loud, he I think it was the first episode when the monster grew, he literally lunged at the thing ready to punch it and got smacked away. It's like, dude, that's badass. This guy cares. This guy legitimately cares for the city he's trying to save. So I'm gonna give credit to Carter Grayson. Romney, your best Rangers.
All right, now this time I am going to go with like Zordon era and post Zordon era. And as for best female Ranger, in the Zordon era, it kind of is, there's not really much real other comparison because of just the amount of episodes and time that went to develop her character. It would have to be Kimberly, just because of how much time she had to actually develop and grow as a character, and even kind of make the big decision of having to give up being a ranger to pursue her own dreams, and this may just be because I finished reading the Pink miniseries, and so it's kind of changed my views on her as a character. But you see kind of how she transformed from being kind of the popular, like, Valley girl who's kind of vain to speak, you see how the experience changes her into a better person, to the point where she pretty much has to make the big decision of, well, I can't follow my dreams and be a ranger at the same time, and so she willingly steps down. And as for the best male ranger of the Zordon era, again, also because of the arc you see of the character, would also have to be Billy, because you see him kind of as a nerd, and granted, I'm probably projecting a lot onto this character, but this is something
I think every geek did.
Yeah, and this is just something I've noticed as I was watching some of the episodes again, up until the end of Zeo, where you kind of see how he changes. At first, he talks in a lot of technobabble. It's very hard to understand him. And part of it, and this is just my theory, that it may have been kind of a defense mechanism. He wasn't really willing to open up to people. And so he figured, if I talk and sound smart, people will be too confused. It felt kind of like armor almost. But then you see as he fights alongside the Rangers, and as he goes closer, you notice he stops using as much technobabble, starts talking like a normal person, slowly begins to open up, as he realizes, hey, yeah, we do risk our lives on a daily basis, but hey, I have friends behind me, I don't have to be as sheltered. And then when you look at the transition from Mighty Morphin to Zeo, where he's just like, hey, there's good I can do without having to put on the suit. There's only 5 crystals, I'll step down and help maintain the Zords and help build the tech, because I learned a lot from the Equations. And that is also something commendable, which is like, hey, I may not be able to fight anymore, much as I would like to, but I know where I'm needed. And then, granted, the way he was written out could have been handled better, but again, that's because...
I mean, I hate to say this, but I agree with Linkara. Like, the best send-off that has ever been done in Power Rangers was probably Kimberly, and everything else looks so lackluster compared to that.
Yeah, usually because with Amy Jo Johnson leaving the show, that was on more amicable terms. It was just a case of, hey, I want to leave the show, so they gave the character a send-off. Just knowing the drama behind why David Yost left, I can't say I blame the writers for having to slapdash together some sort of resolution, especially when you consider just how far Billy had come as a character. But that's kind of why he's my favorite male Ranger of the Zordon era, just because you see how he evolves. I guess that's kind of why I latch on to both Billy and Kimberly. You see how the experiences change them and grow and how they become better people.
The best part is they were basically like, if you look at the first season, they were the weakest Rangers of the bunch because Trini, Zach, and Jason could hold their own, but those two couldn't. They had to pair up. And then eventually they became some of the, I would actually dare say the two of the strongest of the Rangers just because of their sheer experience.
Yeah, and that's kind of one thing I liked about the writing, especially when you look of how they had to transition out Austin St. John, Dewey Trang, and Walter Jones to make way for Adam, Aisha, and Rocky. And you just kind of see the kind of role that Tommy plays in helping them grow, because where you see in the past that they were kind of in their defined roles because of the dynamic that changed with Tommy and because he stayed on as the leader, it almost kind of felt like he was still kind of helping to pull them out of their shell a little bit, and especially after the transition where now they were no longer the weakest links, and had to kind of bring in these new Rangers into the fold, you definitely see kind of how the whole experience changed them as characters. So that's why Billy and Kimberly are kind of my two favorites of the Zordon era. As for the post-Zordon era, for Best Male Ranger, it's kind of a tie. Well, a three-way tie mainly, just across different seasons. The honorable mention I'll give is more or less to Ryan Steele, the Titanium Ranger, just because of how proactive he is. He can't morph the whole time because of the tattoo that's going to kill.
I was kind of hoping we would get another sixth Ranger aside from Tommy announced in here, so that's awesome.
And so, although and I know behind the scenes it's because the Titanium Ranger was an American-made Ranger. There is no Sentai counterpart in Go-Go 5 that Lightspeed Rescue is based on. And they basically wrote around it where he's just like, okay, he decides to be more proactive, trying to find ways to defeat Diabolico and all the other villains while during the time that he's not able to fight. And then as for the two-way tie, it's kind of between Wes and Eric, mainly just because I like the way the two kind of play off of each other. You have Wes, who was born into privilege, but wants, instead of kind of accepting the life of luxury, wants to go out and help people out of an earnest desire to basically make the world a better place. And then you've got Eric, who is also motivated to make the world better, but he's got such a huge chip on his shoulder, and naturally, at first, he cannot stand Wes. He sees them as
Maybe I'm alone in this, but I would actually dare say that the interactions between Wes and Eric, that was way better than what they ever did with Tommy and Jason.
Pretty much.
Because always, like, nothing against Tommy and Jason. I'm sure Austin St. John and Jason David Frank did their best to be able to make that look like a friendship, but with Wes and Eric, they literally approach things as if they were reluctant friends. Like, it was like a Goku Vegeta thing. They hated the crap out of each other, but they could come together and they could be a force that's unstoppable. And it always felt like a real relationship.
Well, yeah, and especially when you just look at how, and you can even kind of see it in Eric's character, how he sees Wes, once again, being given something instead of earning it, as is the case of being made the Red Ranger, and then he finds the Quantum Morpher and he decides, hey, this is my chance to show them this is how you're supposed to do it, you idiots. And I just especially like at the end where he's just like, hey, we have nothing in common, and Wes just like, hey, look at this, and he shows the both Morphers like, this is what we have in common, we're both after the same thing, let's work together.
Well, and the cool part was like because you mentioned it, Eric had a resentment for Wes. And I would actually say Wes had a resentment for Eric because of the way that Eric would approach him. So because of their mutual resentment towards each other is actually, I believe, what brings them together as characters and makes them kind of this dynamic duo of Rangers in the past, so to speak. And so that's best male ones.
Yeah, and as for best female, that's kind of tricky. Again, my memory is a bit phasey, but again, kind of have to give it to Jen from Time Force, just because, again, you see kind of the arc she goes through. She's first the de facto leader, but is clearly hasn't fully processed the emotions of what happened, because, again, first episode, her fiance is presumably killed in battle, so not only does she house all of that drama, she then goes back in time and finds, oh, crap, I have to basically give this morpher to his ancestor who looks exactly like him. And once again, you see this person who's basically trying to focus solely on the job, slowly soften up over time when she realizes that she can't put on that rough exterior, and she kind of has to come to terms with her own emotions, as tragic as they turn out to be by the end of the series.
Yeah, exactly. Andrea, your best and worst Male and female Rangers. So Zordon era and post Zordon era.
Probably Zordon era. Female would be, of course, Kimberly, and a lot of the what Romney said is what I liked about her, basically. And just basically, it's just someone that, she does gymnastics, and it's something I can
you can relate to her because she was a gymnast.
Yeah, but I mean, at the very beginning, it seemed like she was kind of like ditzy, sort of thing,
Yeah, she was the stereotypical Valley girl.
Pretty much. And it seemed like, well, that could get annoying, but eventually she kind of grows to be like a more like of a person that,
a more heart of the team kind of character.
Yeah, you would think like, how long do you think she'd be willing to keep up that role? But, eventually she's like, she takes it seriously, even though, just her personality kind of reflects that.
Okay.
As for the male, I would say that I would think the one that really fascinated me when I watched was Andros from space. What?
When she says fascinate people, she means she had the Legolas crush years earlier.
Just basically...
They're taking the Rangers to Isengard! To Isengard! To Isengard!
Just basically, I really love his story. Basically, He ends up almost losing his best friend. He lost his sister, and he's out there trying to go and see where she is, alongside of trying to find where Zordon has been taken to.
Yeah.
And then, eventually he's like, he thinks he can just do this whole mission on his own, basically. But he eventually accepts the others as part of his team. And then I love it when he starts trying to, try and see if he can get Ashley to notice him. It's just really fun to watch,
Yep. Okay. So Andros and Kimberly. So post Zordon era.
Let's see. Male, I would say, I don't know. I also like Merrick.
Merrick.
The wolf.
Wolf Ranger. I like Merrick, but they made a lot of missteps with that character. That's kind of my viewpoint of it. Is like, I think he had a ton of potential, and then some writer decided, all that's stupid, and let's rewrite this whole thing. And what he wrote back was just not all that worth it. But I could agree. Like, Merrick,
I don't know.
Merrick had a lot of potential.
Well, it was really fun just watching him first being when he was evil, and then he eventually becomes good, and he pretty much takes on the same animal role, like wolf to wolf, and he gets to inherit the Predazord and stuff like that.
Yep.
As for female, it was a big tie between Z from SPD, because I just like it how she starts out.
Is she the yellow one or the pink one?
She's the yellow one, where she's
yeah, that's right. Okay, yeah, because she actually had a story behind her.
Yeah, which she starts out like she's like wants to do the whole Robin Hood thing where they steal from the rich and give to the poor and all that stuff. But then when she gets the opportunity to join SPD, she thinks this is the best opportunity that she's ever going to get, and she doesn't want to have to.
Yeah.
Do As for my other pick, it would have been probably in Lost Galaxy when Corone took the role as the Pink Ranger after.
That was especially meaningful because that was like the first time. I think that was the first time we'd actually seen Rangers died.
Well, that's
right in front of us, and so at that point, like. Yeah, and guys, before people write in the comments, yes, she came back eventually. She was on, what was it, leukemia treatments?
Yeah.
So she came back, but Corone actually stepping in and making up for past wrongs was kind of interesting.
Yeah, it was just interesting that you find out she's the villain of space, but then it's her opportunity to become and do something
pretty
good.
much the first time that's ever been done, I think.
At least as far as
I mean, Tommy. Well, I don't know if I want to count Tommy because Tommy was evil reluctantly.
Well, he was He was under a spell.
Whereas Corone actually was at one point willingly evil.
Well, yeah. Well, she was kidnapped at a very young age, and she was kind of grown into the role, thinking that's what her purpose was. But
okay. And then, I mean, we've literally left out numerous other Rangers that people can look into. And in fact, one of the other ones I'll mention is an honorable one, because I always love the journey that this character goes through. And I didn't mention Jungle Fury, but Jungle Fury is one of my favorites. And the main reason is because of Casey. And the fact that he literally goes from being this very timid understudy in the Paishwa order to actually being able to hold his own and being assertive at the very end of it. And that's what earns him his master's stripes, is that he finally he basically has to conquer himself and his timidness in order to be the master that everybody sees him being. And in fact, he was the one cameo in Super Mega Force that I've always loved, because, like, nothing against Tommy or TJ or any of them, but the Casey episode where he actually teaches the Megaforce Rangers to utilize their inner animals, that's actually really, really cool. He like went from being this timid little kid to being like a Mr. Miyagi kind of character in Super Megaforce. So I love that. Now, I'm not really going to go into a worst Ranger here, because, frankly, I have a feeling that the same names would probably pop up quite a bit. And in fact, they'd probably all be from series that are very much deserving of it. So plus I don't want to really knock those actors. I'm sure they did the best with what they had. And there's really, I mean, aside from certain conflicts here and there really isn't a Ranger actor that is hated by the overall Power Rangers community. I mean, a couple of mentions can be the Black Ranger from Overdrive, but that was just because he was a douche in real life. And also
Justin.
Justin? Why Justin?
I don't know. I thought that would be
Justin is hated, but that's just because they didn't like the direction. The other one is Leo from Lost Galaxy, because of all of the conflicts that he's had with trying to come back and do his roles. So I don't want to necessarily knock these guys, because I'm sure they're good people, Black Ranger withstanding, because he still stole something and he hasn't given it back. But yeah, that's the one thing that you can do here.
Yeah, for those listening after the fact, if you're wanting to look up what we're referring to, the actor's name is Samuel Benta, which he can get Benta.
I couldn't remember his name off. What was that?
Which he can get Benta.
Yes, he can, because I'm not going to go into the incident here. You guys can look it up. He's literally he is a thief in real life, as well as playing a thief on TV. So at that point, the next topic that I kind of want to get into is, and I feel kind of bad because we're running low on time, and I had a feeling we were going to get a lot of Sentai mentions, but one of the things that we actually have considered doing is doing a dedicated Sentai episode where me and Andrea actually go and watch a Sentai, and then like we'll do a We Geek episode going over that and saying like the differences between Power Rangers compared to Super Sentai, which I think is probably a little bit more appropriate to do. Let's go ahead and get into the movie, because look, all of us, okay. Romney bypassed the movies. Like he saw them on DVD. He didn't see them in theaters. We saw them in theaters. And I would still make this argument of, when I saw them in theaters, they were amazing. And it was just because I got Power Rangers on screen, on the big screen. Am I going to say that they're amazing now? No. There's tons of problems with each one of them. And it always makes me sad that, I can't remember his actual name, but the guy who plays Ivan Ooze was the German from Raiders of the Lost Ark. And it's like, oh wow, he went from that to Ivan Ooze. That's kind of sad. And Turbo, lots of missteps, but we now have a new movie, which is a complete reboot of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, even though it's just been narrowed down to Power Rangers. We've had a couple of trailers at this point. We've seen toy leaks. We know what the Zords look like. We know what the Ranger suits are going to look like. We have a fairly good assessment of how the actors are going to be. The first question that I want to ask is, are we walking into this movie optimistic, or has we not seen that one element that still makes us kind of wary about the movie? Why don't you go ahead and start, Romney?
Well, I'm probably at least when it comes to the opinions I expressed at the end of my Power Rangers double feature episode of From the Shelf, I'm actually still moderately excited, both because of what I've seen, but also because of some of the people behind it. I mean, you have the writers of X-Men First Class writing the screenplay. You have Dean Israelite. Now, I know that Adam in particular was not a fan of Project Almanac, but after seeing...
No, but I'm not going to damn a guy for one movie.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing. After seeing Project Almanac, I didn't really know much about Dean Israelite, but after seeing Project Almanac, I literally saw him just like, okay, I can see why they gave him the job, because he knows how to direct teenagers really well. He knows how to kind of make that kind of film that has teenage characters actually, like, he knows how to tell that kind of story. And so he's definitely the best kind of person to take a story about teenagers suddenly being given superpowers by a giant head in a tube and make it believable, at least based on what he did with time travel for Project Almanac, found footage format notwithstanding. And as for the actors themselves, I didn't really recognize most of them except for RJ Cyler, who I saw in Me and Earl and the Dying Girl. He's an incredible actor. He has a really good sense of comedic timing. And so that was definitely something I'm excited to see, especially based on what we've seen in the trailers and how he's kind of tried to be the voice of reason. And so that's definitely something I'm excited about, because I can vouch for him because I've seen him in other things. He's a really good actor, really funny when he needs to be. And so overall, from what I've seen and from what I know, I'm pretty excited going in. I mean, I'm not expecting it to be like everything that I want, because I know that there's going to be some changes, some things done for the sake of the film so that the film will make sense. But at the very least, it looks like the people behind the film are at least putting in more care and effort into actually doing a good job this time, unlike, say, the first Mighty Morphin movie or the numerous adaptations of other popular TV shows we've seen on screen.
Yeah, exactly. And right now, like, for me, I'm fairly optimistic, and it's just because of all the stuff that we've seen thus far in the trailers. The actors look fine. They look like they're doing good portrayals of their characters, at least this rendition of those characters. I don't really have any major complaints with it. Even Alpha, while looking silly, I think he fits within the context of the universe. So at that point, I'm at least happy that they're willing to do everything that is possible to maintain some semblance of continuity and make sure that this is a universe that we can technically go back to if we get the approval to do so. As much as I've had, like, because people have already asked, like, do I have a beef with the Zords? I kind of do. I kind of wanted a big boxy Megazord like in the past, but this is one that's a little bit more fitting to like a CGI capture kind of model, and I'm okay with that as long as we get good characters. I think the only beef that I've had with the movie has been Elizabeth Banks, in the fact that they're kind of hinting that maybe she could come back as the Green Ranger because she's got a lot of gold and green into her outfit.
Well, from the details that have officially leaked, it's not so much even hinted that she'd be coming back. Like, from the official premise that's explained from a lot of the press releases, it's that she was initially the Gold Ranger back when Zordon was the Red Ranger, but then she went rogue. That's kind of been the official story being put forth now. It's not that she'll come back, but more that she was the Green Ranger, but then decided to turn evil.
Yeah, okay, all right. So, because then at that point, it still leaves things open for, like, if we get a sequel, we can still do, like, an evil Green Ranger storyline if we want to go down that path. And I think the only other beef that I've had was, and it wasn't even really with the film, it was the David Yost versus Bryan Cranston comments. And that was really hard to step up the way I did, because I love David Yost, and I appreciate what he had to go through on set, but I just don't think it's right to judge a guy for something that he did in the past when he had years to be able to make up for that. And so those are pretty much the only conflicting things I've had, because Elizabeth Banks, as creepy as she is in Hunger Games, dude, seeing her as Rita in the trailers, it actually kind of fits. It makes sense. Like, I love the fact that she's sitting over Kimberly, or hovering over Kimberly. I've killed Rangers before. That gives you that menace that we've wanted from this character. Andrea, where are you standing with this new movie? Are you still positive about it, or are you having some doubts?
I think it'll be interesting to watch it, just to see how it differs from the TV series that we all know about, just to see what kind of way they took it. And I'd be interested to see how far the story takes it, if it's only going to pretty much go through like the whole first episode, but maybe in a longer way, or, how far, we're going to see. And if there's going to be like a sequel to it, depending on how well it does.
Okay. So yeah, the movie